I'm convinced that John was remembering this conversation when Jesus was washing his feet.
Oh, yeah.
Because he's like, I want to pitch. I want to play shortstop. I want the cool spot. And then Jesus says, nope, sorry, it's not mine to give. It's the Father's. And maybe I'm, reading into this. I'm sure I am at this point. But you got to wonder, does John think Jesus is just blowing him off at that point? Like, oh, yeah, I'm sure. You got people picked out. You're gonna use those spots for leverage whenever you need them. And then Jesus says, no, you don't get it. That's not what greatness looks like in my kingdom. Greatness looks like serving. It looks like being a slave. And part of me, I'm just imagining John is thinking, okay, yeah, sure. But then to see Jesus wrap that towel around his waist, to lay aside, to empty himself literally of his outer clothes and to wash his feet, I think this all has to come back full force for John, and that's why he puts it in his gospel.
Welcome to Let's Talk About That, the podcast where we take a deeper dive into Sunday's message and explore any questions you might have. I'm your host, AJ Stevens, joined by lead pastor Chip Parker, and I'm thrilled to be on this journey with you. Whether you're a longtime member of the Orchard or a first-time visitor, Let's Talk About That is your space to explore, reflect, and connect. Join us as we navigate the intricacies of faith, spirituality, and daily life, seeking to understand how the wisdom shared on Sundays can be applied to our modern challenges. So grab a cup of coffee, find a comfortable space, and let's dive in together. This is Let's Talk About That, where the conversation about Sunday's message never stops.
All right. Well, happy Wednesday at this point. We are coming a day late because, it was Labor Day. It has nothing to do with the fact that Matt and I are both chronically depressed because of the state of our favorite college football programs.
Yeah, this is like deja vu, not just because I was on the podcast 2 weeks in a row, but like here I am after another FSU game feeling exactly how I did last week. The Gators lost, which was a glimmer of hope, and then it was all just all gone.
When is the last time UF and FSU both lost a home opener?
This past week.
Fair enough.
I was going to look it up, but didn't have to go back too far.
Insane. You know what, though? Don't lay up for yourself treasures on earth where moth and rust destroy and thieves break in and steal.
Yeah.
Lay up for yourself treasures in heaven where college football coaches and NIL deals can't break your heart.
That's right.
Pretty sure that's close enough to what Jesus said.
I love that verse.
Yes, great. All right. Well, as you can tell, it is just the two best-looking guys on staff here today, me and Pastor Matt from Live Oak, because AJ, our faithful host, is out this week, not because he's on vacation, not because he is taking it easy, but because they welcomed, he and his wife Katie, Miss Jensen June Stevens into the world last week, which makes you a new uncle as well.
Yeah, uncle again. Yeah, my kids are already fascinated. We've been over there twice now, and they just want to hold her and all this stuff. Our little daughter, our youngest daughter, Kellen, she's barely big enough to hold the baby, but she just thinks she's a little mama, so
she's got it down. So who is more the mama, Kellen or Madeline?
No, Madeline's definitely the mama because she bosses Kellen.
So she's the oldest. So,
but this is Kellen's.
We had this conversation a few episodes ago when Danielle was on here that the oldest is the mama usually.
Yeah, the CEO type. I remember listening to that 100%. She is the CEO, boss you around, check all the boxes, kind of.
Not Hurricane Kellen.
No, Hurricane Kellen. Well, she wants to hold the baby, but there's a time limit there.
Fair enough. So congratulations to AJ and Katie. And I hope they were watching college football this weekend because this means they're moving from man-to-man to zone defense.
Yeah, I don't know if they got a good picture of that in the game that AJ was watching. But I think what they learned is it can be chaotic when you're defending seemingly more people than you have players for.
I'll be honest, when Leanne and I got married, she wanted to have a lot of kids, and I only wanted to have one kid. We wound up with two boys, and by the Lord's grace, that's where we're going to stay, right? But the thought of moving to zone coverage terrifies me. However, when you talk to parents that have like just a bunch of kids, they're like, oh yeah, the third one's, that's a lot. The fourth, fifth, sixth, it's just fine after that.
Yeah, actually, I remember when we did this with Hunter and Seth from Live Oak, and Hunter has 3, so he was like, yeah, I mean, it's chaos, One is great, 2 is a handful, 3 is just chaos, and then Seth's like, yeah, but 4 is, you don't even know they're there. once you're outgunned, it's just.
But see, there's a point where is it easier, or are you just like the meme of the dog sitting in a room that's on fire saying this is fine?
I think I can't. I only have 2, and my hands are full. But I think it's probably like you just, you can only account for so many at once, so it almost alleviates you of responsibility.
Yeah. I know I've told you this story, but I can't remember if I've said it on the podcast. So by now, if you're listening, hopefully you have seen the piece of art that was our O-Day commercial. Shout out to 90s used car salesman Matt Pennington. You did a great job.
My growing up in the 90s really came in handy.
Yeah, I just waiting on like a can of Surge to make its appearance in that commercial. You remember Surge?
Yeah,
Surge.
Mellow yellow.
Surge was electric. But to film that commercial, we drove down one afternoon to Camp Anderson, shot it on location. None of that was CGI. Just throwing that out there. And Erin, our office manager, drove us down there in her SUV. So it was Erin and Mary Beth up front, AJ and I in the 2 captain's chairs in the middle. You and Lucas rode together from Live Oak. And then Chris, the deucer, rode in the very back on the 3rd row. And so we stopped at McDonald's. We got lunch. Chris hops in the back with his. I'm in my seat with mine. The girls are up front. AJ's last to get in. The seat is up and the door's open. And AJ, he's a big guy. And he bought 2 $5 meals. So because he was feeling hungry, right? So he got 2 $5 meals. So he's got his drinks for his meals in both his hands. And he's trying to like shut the seat back for the 3rd row with his elbow. And he can't do it. And so he's like, hey guys, Can one of you help me? Can you shut the seat? And I was like, hold on. You've got 2 hands and you got 2 drinks, so you're having a hard time shutting the seat? Yeah. AJ, what if you had 3 drinks? And just the look on his face when he goes, oh.
Yeah. That moment of, wow.
Oh.
I think I got myself in too deep.
I'm sure that Miss Jensen June is going to be totally fine.
Prayers up.
Speaking of the O-Day commercial, O-Day is coming up just a few days from now. We are going to be at Camp Anderson, anchored on the Swanee River. The beautiful
historic Swanee River.
That's not what you said.
I don't remember what I said. I blacked out.
You know what you say. Beautiful, historical Swanee River.
That's right. It is beautiful and historical, and we want you to be there.
It is both beautiful and historical. I'm not sure that's the right context to use the word historical, but it is historical. It's going to be this Sunday, September the 8th, from 2 to 6 p.m. You don't want to come. You want to be there on time. Listeners of the podcast, you dozens of faithful listeners, be there on time.
Not early.
Not early, because we won't be ready for you. Be there on time. You're going to want to be there on time. Trust me.
And on time is 2 o'clock sharp.
Yep. So let me give you a rundown of what's going to be available that day. We're going to have some golf carts available for transportation. So don't worry about if you feel like, I'm not sure I can make a walk or whatever. We got you covered. Bring a chair. There's going to be a shaded pavilion that you can hang out under with some fans underneath that pavilion. We're going to have some live music with a special appearance from Cadillac and the Hubcaps. We are going to have some pool tables, ping pong tables. There's a volleyball court, a basketball court, gel blasters. People saying, what are gel blasters? It is essentially a water BB that you shoot.
It's like airsoft, but a little softer.
Yeah, it's worse than a Nerf gun. Not as bad as airsoft.
It's a way you got hit, but it doesn't hurt.
Yeah. And I'm just going to throw this out there. Dads, if you got some kids that are getting on your nerves,
this is your chance.
This is
between gel blasters and the blob.
Blob.
Like O-Day was meant for community, but it was meant for dads.
It was
right. It was meant this is the moment you've been waiting for.
Yeah. Moms are going to be stressed out because there's the river and everything, and dad's going to be like, let's go. You're going to be ready for it.
It's going to be great.
So we're going to have the gel blasters. We're going to have the
There's
blob.
A rumor. I mean, you may have some insight into this. There's a rumor that there may be some wiffle ball action or some blitz ball.
There may be some blitz ball action happening. Absolutely. We'll have the blob, have the pool open, because I know some of you moms are like, I don't want my little baby to be by the river. I get that. So we got the pool open.
There will be a lifeguard on duty, too.
There will be lifeguards.
Just throw that out there.
Lifeguards everywhere. And look, the lifeguards are not one of us, so rest easy. Be real lifeguards there. And we haven't really said this yet, but there will be a snack bar there and a coffee shop. Now, that is not a for free snack bar and coffee shop. That is run by the camp. But they do have like drinks, ice cream, chips, coffees, muffins. Their muffins are fire. So there'll be some snacks there. Bring some cash, and they'll be able to hook you up. So am I forgetting anything about O'Day?
There's also another option. Do we talk about that, or is that a surprise?
That's a surprise.
All right. Well,
you will not have to buy every treat. I'll just throw that out there.
Boom. Cliffhanger.
Dozens of faithful listeners. That's what we call clickbait, if there was something for you to click on. O'Day, man, it really is going to be fun. It is a great opportunity, really an excuse for you to invite people to come with you. To quote Matt Pennington, bring your neighbors, bring your kids, bring your neighbors' kids. Disclaimer.
Just make sure you take your neighbor's kids back.
Yeah. Disclaimer, do not kidnap your neighbor's kids.
Yeah. I mean, you can kidnap them as long as you bring them back. That's how I feel about it.
Well, then you borrowed them, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, fair enough. But it's going to be a good time. Invite people. You're going to get to hang out with folks. Bring a chair. It's going to be a good time. You'll be happy that you came. You're going to see pictures. You're going to see videos. You are going to see an awesome baptism at the river. And if you're not there, you're going to be really disappointed that you weren't able to be there. So
I'm looking forward to it. Honestly, I'm jacked. I'm pumped about this.
It's going to be phenomenal. I'll tell you how excited I am about O'Day. We have a baseball tournament this weekend up in Georgia. I've got 2 teams playing in it. And word so far is that we are not both playing at the same site. So I may even be having to drive back and forth between a couple of towns in Georgia on Saturday. No idea when we're getting home that night. And I'm still psyched for O'Day on Sunday. I'm ready for it. It's going to be a good time.
I'm here for it. I'm ready for the blob. Like, let's just put it out there. Like, I can't wait to see dads and kids and students and all that just flying into oblivion.
Are you going to show them how to do it?
I'll go.
Are you going to show them how to squeal?
That was added. I'm going to defend myself. I may have done that last week. I caught so much flack all week.
Sure.
I had people, first of all, I really don't know how I drew the short stick. Like, of all the personalities on our staff, and we get to Camp Anderson, we're shooting a video, and they're like, oh, by the way, you're going to be the guy. And I'm like, me? Like, I'm probably the worst option.
Okay, let me break this down for you. Here's a logical decision. Number 1, Eddie was going to be the guy until Eddie didn't make it, had a funeral, legitimate excuse. He didn't make it. Number 2, I'm chubby. Number 3, Aaron and Mary Beth are ladies. Number 4, Lucas and AJ are big guys, so they weren't going to get the air that you did. You're the skinny guy who's on staff. You were the guy that had to get launched.
Yeah, which meant I had to do the whole video.
No, that was just because I didn't want to.
Yeah, exactly. So I drew the short stick. I'm glad you guys, everyone who said something about it on Sunday, I'm glad you guys got a kick out of it. That's great. I'm just here to serve. But
hey, did you play it Sunday?
Myself.
Did you play it this past Sunday too?
Yeah, because you told me to.
Okay,
I woke up.
Hey, Hunter, you're the one who texts me when you hear something. Hunter, I need you to text me and let me know if Matt actually played the video.
Okay,
chickened out because he didn't want to.
Yeah, so Chip texted me literally at like 7 o'clock on Sunday morning. I was like, hey, I think we need to show the video again. I'm trying to get out of it. And so, yeah, we had to do
maybe
it.
We can. I don't know.
So I did get to leave the room, though. We did at the beginning. Seth did the welcome, so I got to leave the room. I didn't have to endure it.
Hunter, confirm. But O'Day, it's going to be good. Don't miss it. This Sunday, September 8th from 2 to 6 p.m. So let's shift gears a little bit to something a slightly more serious. And we are rounding out our series this past Sunday, Answers from Jesus. It's always a good series when we do things like this. The Questions from Jesus was good. When we have done series and the Gospels, I just feel like the Gospels are real relatable, right? You get to see Jesus, a lot of it's narrative. It's good stuff. And we joke that, we kind of knew it was going to be a pretty good series, and that's why we put it right there when school starts, before hunting season starts. That's kind of that prime slot. So I think it was a good series, but I'm interested, Matt, give me some of your thoughts on the series, because I usually, not all the time, I'm usually the one kind of putting the outline stuff together, kind of the big framework, and then you guys take and make it your own from there. But because of that, I'm usually predisposed to the idea of the series anyway. I'm interested. What did you think about this series? What did you like? What did you wish we had got more into?
So just personally, this is probably more of like a personality thing. But for me, anytime, and I love to teach the Bible. I'm sure you would say the same. Like, I think if God calls you to do something, he equips you with not only the ability, but also the passion for it. If you're a nurse and you feel like God's called you to do that, you're probably passionate about taking care of people and maybe teaching, whatever that is. For us, it's just, and I don't know why God chooses to do the things he does, but, God called us to ministry. And so there's always a passion to teach his word, right? You just want to help people understand it. You want them to almost have that light bulb moment of the truth, and then let God's truth impact their lives, and you're just the vehicle of communication. And so, that's not a cop-out, but like anytime you get to teach. But I will say probably my favorite thing to teach on as far as genre goes would be narrative. Whether it's Old Testament narrative, whether it's the Gospels. I love the Gospels because it's that narrative, but it's like so relatable for us because it's more, Old Testament, there's sometimes things that are so vastly different from our culture, but the New Testament is very similar. It's different culture, but like it's almost like more modern, I guess.
Yeah, I mean,
it's relatable.
It's a lot more relatable because
without the extra unpacking, it's all relatable. But
speaking historically, I would say that most people in our part of the world are a lot more familiar with some of the themes of the Roman Empire and the fact that Israel at that time had been kind of westernized, begun being
It's almost even well documented, like in series and history, TV shows and movies and stuff. Like you almost feel more comfortable, I guess.
Yeah, the straight up Eastern culture of the Old Testament is a little bit harder to connect.
Yeah, there's not a lot of like just stuff available to us without us really digging down to it. So all that to say, I love the series because it's the gospel. But here's what I love about the series and what I love about the Gospels in general. I love it because we get to see Jesus for who he is. These are interactions with people and Jesus and people. He is being asked questions, sometimes to try to trip him up or to test him, as we saw with the lawyer. Sometimes probably out of like, I can't believe my eyes with Pilate. Are you the king? Like, I don't see an army. You don't really...
This does not make sense.
Yeah, you don't look like you're a very imposing figure. Like, are you really the king? But in these interactions, these are genuine, whether they're genuinely there to test or to ask questions to find information. But I love it. And here's what I love is that you see the picture of Jesus. And I love seeing the picture of Jesus because sometimes, and maybe even oftentimes, the picture of Jesus in the Gospels is vastly different from what we have in our heads. We like to create this Jesus where, we put him in this box and he always does things a certain way. And then here we see, sometimes he doesn't answer a question directly. Sometimes he tells a story. Sometimes he ignores. Sometimes he says, actually, there's a better question. I'm not even going to answer you.
That's the wrong question.
But it's in these interactions, you get this genuine picture of Jesus, and there is no cookie cutter. We saw that last week. There is no formula. It's just Jesus meeting people where they are, even if they have bad intentions. He meets them where they are, and he teaches them, and he shows them who he is. So honestly, I don't know. The only criticism I would say, if you ask of like, what could we do different, would be like for me, I was like, let's just keep going.
Keep going. Yeah.
Like that. I don't have I think we could have done this better. Like I love these kind of series, and I know there's a purpose and a place for different series, and topics, but these are always like, I love these.
It's good. I mean, they really are. They're fun series because Jesus is such a revolutionary figure. For us as believers, obviously, but even historically for the secular world, he was like this guy just, was not a status quo guy. And I guess for me, that was the one unexpected, no pun intended, takeaway for this series is that the answers that we get from Jesus are not always the answers we expect.
Exactly.
But they're always the answers that we need.
Yeah.
And that hit me about the third week in this series. And I just kind of kept throwing it out there and saying, you know what? In my life, I've went to Jesus for answers. Sometimes I don't know that I got a clear one. Sometimes I got a very clear one, but it wasn't what I wanted to hear. And yet every time I got an answer, even when it's not what I was looking for, what I expected, what I wanted, it is what I needed. And I think seeing that play out in real scenarios with Jesus and people in a physical conversation on earth, it just kind of affirms that this isn't new. This is who Jesus has always been. So that was one of the big, I'll say the big takeaway for me from this series. I'm curious, do you have any this is kind of the one thing that I think I'm going to take away from this series or that will stick with me from the series?
I think the one thing this series allowed us to do is to really dial in, like focus in, zoom in on some of the characters and interactions that maybe aren't typically focused on in Jesus' life. Like with Pilate, we know that that's a part of the story, but really like Pilate's just a bridge to get to the cross, and we're really waiting for that part, right? Like if you know the Bible and you grew up in Sunday school, vacation Bible school, whatever, like, okay, this is the end of the story. This is the good part.
Yeah, we're getting to the end.
But then we got to spend 35 minutes looking at Pilate asking Jesus a question, and you really get to just zoom in on that. You get last week, and I know last week was just one of those messages. This week, honestly, was one of those as well. Of just some of the. I said this. I'll just say it this way. I said this in Live Oak, and it didn't dawn on me till Sunday morning. And you know how some of that goes. Like you have you have your plan, so to speak. You have your outline. You've prayed through. You've studied through. You have your slides. All that.
Yeah, I'm going to pull back the curtain a little bit and show you how the sausage is made. If you're just listening to this podcast, Matt is a little bit earlier than I am on this. I don't speak for Matt, but for myself, I rarely make my PowerPoint slides until very early Sunday morning. So I wake up really early on Sunday morning. That's when I make my PowerPoint slides. And it's because the way I want to say something, or if I want to use a picture, something, I want to make sure that I'm settled on this is what I want to say, what I want to show, how I want to say it. Yeah. Not that the message is changing, but it's those fine points.
Yeah, I mean, sometimes you want to, you have like this intro is like really just going to fit perfect. Like some of that stuff fluctuates, but my type A will not allow me. I've tried it. I know you guys talk about it all the time. I have literally tried to make myself do my slides Sunday morning just for that reason. Because, I even wake up sometimes and shuffle them around.
Yeah, you don't like getting up early. I get it.
But I can't. My type A is like, what if the Wi-Fi goes out? What if I wake up late? I can't. So, yeah, I do mine Saturday. But so Sunday morning it hit me John, we were in John chapter 13. Jesus washing the disciples' feet. And I fast forward and I opened with this idea that John wrote his gospel with this purpose in mind. He said, Jesus did a lot of stuff. I wrote these things, and we caveat that with under the inspiration of the Holy Spirit. But John says, I wrote these things so that you will know that Jesus is who he said he is, that he's the Messiah, the Son of God, and in him you will have life.
Yeah.
Right? That's his purpose. And what was fascinating, what dawned on me on Sunday, and I say all this to go back to the original question, zooming in on this particular encounter allowed me to kind of connect these dots for me personally. I don't know if it was helpful for anybody else, but for me, it's like, man, this is a big deal. John's the only one that talks about Jesus washing the disciples' feet in his gospels, or in all 4 gospels. So for John, who says, hey, I've purposefully left some things out, but the things that I included under the inspiration of the Holy Spirit is so that you will know who Jesus is and that you can have life in his name. And for John, this was one of those moments where he was like, something went off in his brain, the light bulb, whatever. In hindsight, he gets back and he says, man, this was a pivotal moment where Jesus washing our feet was so instrumental in John that he's like, no, I'm going to put this in there. And Matthew, Mark, and Luke don't specifically mention this. They mention, that same night, being in the upper room, the Lord's Supper and all that. But for John, there was something that happened this night with Jesus washing his disciples' feet where he said, man, there's something powerful about this. And maybe it's what Jesus says, right? You don't know what I'm doing now, but you will one day understand. It will all make sense in the future.
Yeah, I think that you're spot on about, it's crazy that John's the only one that included this.
Yeah.
Because all the other Gospels mention the upper room, but John included this. And I think, and we talked about this a little bit in our communicators meeting on Tuesday, that there was a very subtle rebuke towards John personally in the washing of the disciples' feet. Because I mentioned this, I don't know if you mentioned this in your message, I mentioned it in Matthew 20, we see John's mom go to Jesus.
Wait, did John play travel ball?
Yeah, right. We go talk to the coach, I want to pitch. John's mom goes to Jesus and knelt down in verse 20 to ask him something. 21, what do you want? He asked her. Promise, I love that. She said, make me a promise. Promise, she said to him, that these 2 sons of mine may sit one on your right and the other on the left in your kingdom. And Jesus answered, you don't know what you're asking. Are you able to drink the cup I'm about to drink? We're able, they said to him. So obviously they went with their mom, but let their mom do the talking. He told them, you will indeed drink my cup, but to sit at my right and left is not mine to give. Instead, it's for those for whom it's been prepared by my Father. And when the 10 disciples heard this, they became indignant with the 2 brothers. Jesus called them over, and this is what he said. This was the lesson. You know that the rulers of the Gentiles lord it over them, and those in high positions act as tyrants over them. It must not be like that among you. On the contrary, whoever wants to become great among you must be your servant, and whoever wants to be first among you must be your slave, just as the Son of Man did not come to be served, but to serve, and to give his life a ransom for many. I'm convinced that John was remembering this conversation when Jesus was washing his feet.
Oh, yeah.
Because he's like, I want to pitch. I want to play shortstop. I want the cool spot. And then Jesus says, nope, sorry, it's not mine to give. It's the Father's. And maybe I'm, reading into this. I'm sure I am at this point. But you got to wonder, does John think Jesus is just blowing him off at that point? Like, oh, yeah, I'm sure. You got people picked out. You're gonna use those spots for leverage whenever you need them. And then Jesus says, no, you don't get it. That's not what greatness looks like in my kingdom. Greatness looks like serving. It looks like being a slave. And part of me, I'm just imagining John is thinking, okay, yeah, sure. But then to see Jesus wrap that towel around his waist, to lay aside, to empty himself literally of his outer clothes and to wash his feet, I think this all has to come back full force for John, and that's why he puts it in his gospel.
Yeah, I mean, just, again, this light bulb moment of Jesus in his interactions with people. He doesn't always answer the way that we might think that he would. He doesn't always give us the answer we think we could or that we deserve or whatever. But, like, here's Jesus. And, in fact, up until Peter asked the question in John's gospel, it says that he just got up and did it. Probably doesn't say a word. There's no dialogue. And the disciples are probably looking at each other like, what's he about to do? Because like 3 years in, you're probably like on edge of anytime Jesus does something, you're locked in.
Oh, yeah. They were 100% like, what is going to happen now?
But it doesn't say, and we don't know when Peter was, he may have been first,
that's right,
middle, last. We don't know.
Early church fathers said that he was the first one who went. Some early church fathers say he's the last one who went. Reality, we have no idea.
We don't know, but I mean, honestly, the way it reads, in my opinion, and this isn't necessarily based in the Greek, it's just the way it reads is Jesus got up, wrapped the towel, started washing feet, and it was probably like by the time it got to Peter, he's like, well, I'm going to say something nobody else is saying anything, but they're all
right. That fits Peter's character.
But they're all like stunned and in shock of like Jesus, and again, here's John. He's just with mom and brother in hand, like gone and basically made a deal with Jesus. Hey, can we be like vice kingdomaries or whatever that is, right?
Can you make us the Secretary of Defense?
Yeah, and then Jesus says, no, actually, that's not how my kingdom works. And I love that because he continues to teach them, my kingdom's different. It's the same thing he told Pilate. Are you the king? Oh, I'm not just a king. I am the king. And yet my kingdom, Pilate, is so much vastly different than the Roman Empire and how you govern and strong arm and all this stuff.
You don't even understand what that means.
Yeah, and I think you just see this, and for whatever reason, John's like, man, this was monumental in my life, and I'm going to put it in the gospel because you need to know this is what it's like in the kingdom. And again, there's dual meaning here, right?
Absolutely.
We have clearly Jesus setting an example of being humble, being a servant, taking the role of a servant, elevating the needs of other people. Like all of that element is there, and he goes on to expound on this. I know we didn't preach it on Sunday, but if you read from 12 on, like he literally tells them this, right?
He says this is, and he does. He said, this is an example. I'm doing this for you so that you would do this for others.
Right. And I mean, you got to think, Jesus also preparing them. He's going to be gone soon, not just like crucified and raised, but within 40 days of that, he's going to be gone. And so here he is commissioning them to go throughout the world to teach this is who Jesus is, to make disciples, to baptize them in the name of the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. Like he's preparing them. And how monumental was that for them to say, like, hey, Jesus did this for me, so there's no one that I can't serve.
Yeah, and the way that I worded it in my notes when I was writing out this message, getting ready to preach it, is if the King can wash our feet, we can wash our neighbors.
Exactly. And we, again, this goes back to the other messages. That was one thing I loved about the series. It seemed like there was threads and themes. Not
almost even, like Jesus had a consistent message.
Yeah, but like we didn't like say, hey, pull this thread, this. Like it's just it's there, and yet you begin to see in Jesus' interactions, we don't get to decide who our neighbor is.
That's right.
And one of the things that, I don't know, we talked about it in our communicators. I don't know if you use it or not, but a year or two ago, there was just a trend, I'll call it, on social media. And it was Jesus knew, but Judas ate too. Yeah. Right? That was, it was, everybody shared it. And it was like this, like,
every Easter it comes back around 100%. Like, Jesus knew, Judas ate too. 100%.
And so I'm very like anti tradition when it comes to like, if everybody's sharing it, I'm definitely not going to share it.
Well, you're a contrarian.
Yeah, that's a good word for it. So that's me. But I will say, like, when you look at it in this message, that's a valid point to bring out, because if Jesus knew, and John makes that very clear in verse 1, he says, look, all this is happening because his hour had come. He knows everything. He knows who's going to betray him. And yet Jesus allows Judas to be there. If the king of the universe is able to wash his betrayer's feet, then who am I to say, oh, I can't serve that person, I can't love that person?
Well, I think that's kind of the context that I mentioned it in Sunday, is it's not just that Judas ate too, because if somebody comes over to your house, yeah, you're gonna feed them. I'm not gonna withhold the food from you. It's not just that Judas ate too. Jesus washed Judas's feet.
Yeah.
Like, that's just a whole nother level.
And it just raises the bar, because Jesus, again, without saying it, but demonstrating it to people like John, who are going to take the gospel to all over the world, to people who are different culturally, who speak different languages, who have different customs, who don't agree with them, who probably want to kill them, put them in jail, all that stuff. And yet Jesus models for them, you don't just serve the people that look and dress and think and act like you.
That's right.
Judas was there. Judas ate too. Judas's feet were clean. And yet Jesus knew that, in a matter of hours, he would be betrayed by this man.
Yeah, and I think, you started down that road a little bit when you said, that it's not just an example, but it is an example. Like, it's more than that. Because what we also said Sunday is that it's not just an example of how we're to serve others. It's not less than that. It's more. Mm-hmm. And the more is that this foot washing was a picture of salvation. Yep. And I think you see that in the question, and you already mentioned this question, Matt, when, or the statement, the answer, not the question, the answer from Jesus, where he said, look, what I'm doing now, you're not going to understand. You're going to understand after. Well, after what? Mm-hmm. After the cross. After the cross, you're going to understand that this is a picture of salvation. And that's why Jesus makes the statement when he says, look, if I don't wash you, Peter, because Peter says, you're never going to wash me. The literal
translation. He first asked, right? He says,
are you going to?
Right.
Not as a question, but as a challenge.
Yeah. Like, Jesus, are you going to do this? And I do think, like, let's give Peter credit. And we talked about this a little bit on Tuesday. Peter at this point had already declared that Jesus is the Messiah, the Son of God.
Yes.
Right. And he says to him, you're the rock upon which I will build my church, based on that confession. Right. So Peter has already acknowledged who Jesus is. So to be fair to Peter, because I would like to think my first reaction would be the same.
Yeah.
Is like,
for sure,
Jesus, are you going to wash my feet? Like, I know who you are.
Yeah. I think the better translation, if I'm translating it, let me be clear, this would not be the literal translation. This would just convey
the CPV.
Yeah, CPV. Convey the same meaning. CPV would be, you're not really going to wash my feet, are you?
Yeah.
That's the idea. Like,
but it has this underlying connotation of, Jesus, I know that you are the Lord. You are the Messiah. You are the Son of God. I can't allow the Son of God to do this for me. I should be doing this for you.
Just think about, we have joked before that, our wives can share similar personalities. And part of that is like the OCD personality. And it's like, if somebody comes over to my house, my wife would never let them clean the house.
Right.
You know what I mean? Like, no, you're a guest. You're not doing that. Well, okay, amp that up to God in human flesh washing your feet on his knees.
The role that was reserved for servants, right? And that was one of the things that I can't remember who the commentator was, but they pointed out the way they would recline at the table was everyone's facing the center. You're reclining, you're leaned up on an elbow. But in that position, your feet are more than likely like behind you.
Yeah, we always picture it happening in a chair, but they didn't use chairs around the table back then.
They reclined at the table. Right. So almost in like this lounge position, propped up on an elbow, feet pushed back behind them. And the commentator pointed out, like in most circumstances, the servant would come and could wash their feet and would be completely oblivious.
Yeah, not that they wouldn't feel him, they just wouldn't acknowledge it.
They just wouldn't acknowledge it because that's in the background.
Yeah.
My focus is at the center of this table with the people around me. And that person, that servant, would go unnoticed. Like, that's how lowly the position was.
So I don't know if you've ever watched, and typically it shows that are like CIA type shows, like government briefings. They're usually like in this big boardroom. I think the one I'm thinking of is like the Jack Ryan show that was on Amazon for a while. there's like a big boardroom and all the important people are at the boardroom, the conversations. And then you have all like the junior analyst assistants like sitting around the outside of the room.
They're not part of the table.
Yeah. I don't care about you. You don't speak. You're just here to listen. I'm focused on the table and my seat at the table. And that's why Jesus, in another one of his teachings, says, look, the wealthy among you, the important among you, want to always claim the best seat at the table. And what Jesus is saying by being a servant, he's leaving the table. He's not even at the table. He's leaving the table to go behind the table to wash people's feet.
Yeah. And I just, again, in Peter's question, I think we can at least be fair. And Peter's like almost blown away of, Jesus, I can't let you do, like, there's no way. You're not going to wash my feet.
I love the literal translation of what he says. When Jesus says, okay, what I'm doing now you don't understand, but you will after. And then Peter responds, and literally it says, you will not in forever wash my feet. Not you'll never, you won't in forever wash my feet. But then Jesus makes the statement, if I don't wash you, you don't have any part in me. You're not a partaker of me. And that's when we begin to see the salvation aspect in it, right? Is that, okay, there's something else going on here. And then Peter says, oh, well, then not just my feet, my head, my hands, do everything.
Right. Every crevice. I don't want to miss anything.
That's right. And then Jesus makes this statement, and I want you to talk about this. He makes a statement that brings out an inherent tension, especially when it comes to salvation. He says, those who've been bathed don't need to be washed again because they're completely clean. But then he goes, you only need to wash your feet.
Right.
So kind of talk about that tension for a little bit, about Jesus saying, as it relates to the picture of salvation, if you've been bathed, you don't need to be washed again. You only need to wash your feet.
Yeah. Before we do that, though, I want to go back real quick and just kind of paint the picture of what Jesus says, right? Because it's this monumental moment. I can picture, like everything in the room goes silent as Peter's processing what Jesus says. He doubles down, right? You will never in forever.
And when he says that, John goes, oh, snap.
Yeah. And then the music fades, But Peter doubles down. He's like, no, you will never. And I think, again, he recognizes who Jesus is. This is a recognition, like, I cannot allow the Son of God, the King of the universe, to do this for me, right? But then Jesus says, if I don't, you have no share in me. And I think the picture, the connection here where Peter eventually gets to is this. Peter, if you don't allow me to take the role of a servant, if you don't allow me to humble myself to this role and to wash your feet because you want to save me the embarrassment and all this stuff, Peter, if you won't allow me to wash your feet, how in the world are you going to allow me to die for you?
Yeah.
Because that's the implication, right? Is
that is the implication.
And so dying, that is where the salvation comes from. That is where the quote unquote washing comes from our sin. Our sin is washed. We are made clean by the sacrifice, the atonement that Jesus provides for us. And yet this is a microcosm of that. Peter, if you can't allow me to humiliate myself, so to speak, take the role of a servant because you're trying to, spare me from the shame and all of this of doing this, then you're missing the point because I have
if you think this is shameful,
this is the less
36 hours.
This is the lesser to the greater, right? And Peter, if you can't come to terms with the lesser, there's no way you're going to allow it. And we see this a little bit, right?
That's exactly right.
Because a couple hours later in the garden, Peter's like, oh, you're not going to take him? Bam. And he cuts off Malchus's ear.
Well, Peter is just thoroughly convinced he can do what Jesus can do. He knows Jesus is greater. He knows Jesus is the Christ. He thinks, Peter's the kind of guy who says, I'm not perfect, but.
Yep.
And it's like, oh, I appreciate you saying that, Peter, because I assumed you were. He tries to walk on water, amazing faith. Mm-hmm. But the man thought because Jesus did, he could.
Yeah.
At the end of this chapter, he says, well, wherever you go, I can go. Whatever you're going to do, I'm going to do.
I'll never deny you.
Fools do. I'm not going to deny you. Yep. And then, like you say, in the garden, he's like fighting off, the high priest, bodyguard by himself.
Mm-hmm.
So there is that humility of, I'm not going to let you do this because of who you are. Mm-hmm. There's also a subtle hint of, I also don't need you to do this because of who I am.
Yeah. And I think it's just like, if we could just sit here, and that's what I love about the series, even personally, I've read the story of the foot washing, all this, but you almost get to sit in it because you're thinking about it to understand it. you're thinking about the implications, but then you're also thinking about how can I help other people understand like the gravity of the situation. So you kind of get to sit here. But it was just this moment of like, Peter, you have to come to terms with, I have to do for you what you can't do for yourself.
That's right.
And that's the salvation implication. Here's the other thing. Jesus is the only one who can wash. And I made this point on Sunday. Listen, we live in the Bible Belt South. We have a lot of good guys, good girls who have manners and polite and do a good job at work. They're responsible, all this stuff. But there are so many people who sit in pews or chairs on Sunday mornings who are still trying to wash themselves.
Well, the way that I put it is there are a lot of people who are quick to wash the feet of others, but have never let Jesus wash their feet.
Because I can't allow you to do that for me. Like, I got to prove my love, my devotion. I got to prove how sincere I am. I'm going to sing in the choir. I'm going to teach this class. I'm going to give this much money. And it's almost like we just try to prove this is how devoted I am to you, Jesus, that I can't allow you to do for me. I'm going to show you by all the things that I'm doing how much I love you, how much I get. And Jesus is like, no, like if I don't wash you, you have no inheritance in my kingdom.
Yeah.
You have no share, no part in me. And so again, that's the salvation implication of this.
Yeah,
it is.
And it's so important because it is the washing, not the, I'm going to pour you the water and lay out the towel. Mm-hmm. Like I think so many times the way Southern fried Christianity operates is, number one, there's so many people that are not saved because they've never been lost. They're a good person. Their grandma was a Christian. I don't mind washing other people's feet, but Jesus has never washed mine. There's that. But then there's also that very subtle, well, no, Jesus did wash my feet. And when we say that, we just mean he made it possible for me to wash my feet.
Yeah.
And I think that's kind of the subtle, deadly train of thought that some people have. Is it's not Jesus made me clean, Jesus made it possible for me to be clean. Right. And that's an eternal difference between those two.
Yeah, and I mean, honestly, I had some conversations with these guys that came to my house. They were Mormons, and like, this is Mormon theology of salvation. Is like, yeah, Jesus made it possible, but I have to make up the difference.
That's right.
It's Jesus did part of it, but I got to finish the work. And it's coming to the reality that Jesus is the only one who can wash. He has already finished the work of salvation. We come to terms with this in humility, that there's nothing we can do but accept and surrender our lives to him because of what he's done, that he made atonement for our sin. He did what only he could do that we couldn't do for ourselves. And so,
yeah,
it's just.
And we talked about that Sunday, is that, does it take humility to wrap a towel around you and wash somebody's feet? Sure it does. Maybe less than we might imagine in a Christian Southern fried subculture that.
Well, I think for us, we've seen it done so many times as a sermon illustration that we're almost desensitized to it a little bit.
To the nastiness of it.
The cultural.
So it takes humility to wash someone's feet. I'm convinced it takes far more humility to let someone wash your feet.
Yeah.
Have you ever done that? Have you ever washed somebody's feet?
Especially when you know, hey, I didn't get a chance to shower before I came, so my feet are nasty. I haven't trimmed my toenails in 3 weeks. Like,
I got hobbit feet, bro.
Like, we try to cover our imperfections. Yeah. And yet when it comes down to it, if we're going to let someone do that, it's flaws and all.
Yeah. Have you ever washed somebody's feet before? You been a part of that?
I think so. Yeah. Honestly, if I can't remember, I probably purged it.
Yeah, fair enough. Have you ever had somebody wash your feet?
Yes.
What was that?
I think it was a student ministry. Mm-hmm. I think we even did it a couple times. But again, it's like, you almost were prepped for it. And so you put on your best, you made sure your socks were clean. You made your, all the dirt was gone.
I got you.
You know what I mean? Like,
yeah, I'll never forget a foot washing that I participated in as a service project. And I think I shared this with you guys on Tuesday, is that we were part of working with a ministry who provided shoes for kids who were going back to school. So it's like, we do this here a little bit differently in Lake City, where we get school supplies. Live Oak, you get school supplies. Branford, you get school supplies, and they go in backpacks and go to the kids. Well, this ministry that I was helping with in Mayo, the kids actually came to the church to pick up the backpacks. And then there was this ministry that we brought in that also provided them shoes. But, we always say, we want to do ministry without hooks. Well, the ministry had a hook, and the hook was, you get the shoes, but we're going to wash your feet and share the gospel with you and pray with you. Which, when they came to the church to get it, we can talk about hooks another time. It was that ministry, and it was effective. Mm-hmm. I mean, I'll never forget washing the feet of these kids and even the parents, a few of them, when they got shoes, because they had shoes for some of the adults too. And even, with kids, a lot of times they don't care. Kids are just kids. I can remember these young kids, elementary school age, who you could see the humility it required of them to let you wash their feet. Because
was there
say it again?
Was there elements of like shame there, or
I think probably so in some. I think it was more of a awareness. Hey, I'm coming here to get backpacks and to get shoes. I'm already in your debt. I don't need you to wash my feet too. Yeah. That kind of thing. And I think that's the first time that ever clicked with me is, man, it takes a lot of humility for that to happen. And then it didn't take long to connect the dots and like, wow, how many people that are sitting in our churches, like they can't get to that place. Mm-hmm. They just can't get to that place because they can't allow Jesus. And that's weird to say you can't allow Jesus, but they can't allow Jesus to do that for them because it takes too much humility. It brings up too much shame because you see my dirtiness, you see my imperfection, like you said. So, yeah.
And again, I want to get to your original question in a second, but just think, Jesus says to Peter, what I'm doing now, you don't realize, but afterward you understand. I can't help but imagine that moment that it clicked for Peter. They're seeing Jesus. He's brutally beaten. He's tortured. He's shamed on the cross, right? And they're looking at him and they know, hey, he said he did this to die for sin. And it's, oh, surely he's talking about the Romans. They're evil, wicked people. They tax us. They're hard on us. They rule the world. Those are like pagan people. I can see that. But then you come to this moment and you realize, like, he's there for me. He's there for what I've done, what I've thought, what I've said. He's there for my moments of disobedience. He's there for those moments in my life, Peter, and me personally. Again, like you're saying, it's almost like sitting there with all your flaws, and you come to that moment and you're like, man, I'm already in debt to you. I really don't want to sit here and let you wash my feet too,
Absolutely.
But it takes humility, and it takes humility to realize, like, Jesus did that for me.
Yeah, it is something I've always said when I've had conversations, and again, back with kids, who are, hey, I'm ready to get baptized. And I'll have a conversation with them and go, what does that mean? Why do you want to get baptized? Tell me about Jesus. Just talking with them, make sure they really understand, because sometimes it's, hey, I just want to get baptized. There's a big difference when you hear from a kid, Jesus died on the cross for our sins, and Jesus died on the cross for my sin. That's a big difference. And I'm not sure that a lot of people who sit in our chairs on Sunday appreciate that difference. Like, theologically, you can get, Jesus died on the cross for our sins. But just like you just said, Matt, it's a world of difference. But Jesus died on the cross for my lust. Jesus died on the cross for my greed. It was my self-righteousness that caused him to be whipped and a crown of thorns. That's a different ballgame.
Yeah, honestly, I didn't even make it that deep of a connection on Sunday, and I don't know that we made it in the messaging. Again, this is the personal side of like wrestling with this, but we closed the service with the song, How Deep the Father's Love for Us.
I love that song.
And I love the lyric in there. It says, it was my sin that held him there. And I think that's the moment of humility. That's the moment of letting the King of the universe wash my feet, flaws and all, is because that's the lesser. The greater is, well, I've got to see him on a cross and know that he's there for me.
That's right.
He's like, I put him there, so to speak, Yeah,
I had, again, that same song, one of my favorite verses of that song is, why should I gain from his reward? I can't give an answer. Right? And that's it. Like, Jesus, you've already done so much. Why should I gain anything from this? And man, okay, from that, let's bring it back then full circle. Is what that verse means, the song, what should I gain from his reward, is that when Jesus washes us, he doesn't bring us back to a state of neutrality. He doesn't just wash away our sin. There's another aspect of this where he covers us with his righteousness. That's his reward, his righteousness, his perfection, his standing before the Father. So it's not just that he washes away our filthiness, he gives us his cleanliness. And that's why he says, once you've been bathed all over, you don't need to be washed again.
Right.
You only need to wash your feet. So go back to that. What does that mean that if we're bathed all over, we don't need to be bathed again. We're completely clean. But then he says, but you only need to wash your feet. Like, how do you hold that tension? How is that not a contradictory statement?
Yeah, I put it in our modern context, and that's this. Some of you guys, maybe you shower before you go to work in the mornings. Well, if you shower before work, you don't take a shower again when you eat lunch. You just go to the bathroom and wash your hands, right? Like, you are clean. You just need to wash your hands for hygiene and germs and all that stuff. And that's kind of what Jesus says. He says one who has bathed doesn't need to wash anything except his feet. Like, it's a hygiene picture in their connotation, in their culture, right? It's, hey, you take a shower, but then this is just the custom of the day, like good hygiene and stuff.
Yeah, that is the earthly
illustration
for the illustration.
And then that is rooted in the spiritual reality that we are bathed when we have been washed by Jesus. We have been washed by his blood. We have been gifted his righteousness. We have been clothed. The way I explain it when I talk with people, especially with kids, is when God sees us through our faith, we have been clothed with righteousness. When God sees us, he now sees Jesus. And when he sees Jesus, he sees perfection. That is his gift to us. We have been washed. And the reality is, when Jesus says one who has bathed doesn't need to basically wash again, doesn't need to bathe again, it's because that is a moment that has been finalized in heaven. That moment of faith has established our position in Jesus for all of eternity. And the good news for us is that's what we mean when we say our salvation is not dependent on who we are, it's dependent on who Jesus is. And the moment our faith is deposited in Jesus, his righteousness is credited to us.
That's right.
Right? It's like this divine transaction that happens. You go to the store.
Martin Luther called it the great exchange.
Exactly. You go to the store, you swipe your debit card or whatever in exchange for something, right? And we deposit our faith in Jesus, and then he credits us, he gifts us with his righteousness. And that's the spiritual connotation of what he says.
Clean.
That's the bathe, that's the clean. Reality is, though, just because we are clean, just because we have been clothed in righteousness, does not mean that we are no longer capable of unrighteousness.
Wait, say that? No, I'm just kidding. I think everybody gets that experientially. Yep. Like, just because you trust Jesus as your Savior, okay, that doesn't mean that you're now a perfect person.
Exactly. Because, and to use this is not an illustration, this is the biblical understanding. The way Paul paints it is this, though, is that we are born, we have one nature. We are one person, and that is a sinful person. We have a sin nature. Our sin nature produces in us desires that are contrary to God's desires, his will, his plan, all that. It leads us into rebellion. The moment that we come to faith in Jesus, Jesus said this to Nicodemus, we are born again. What that means is we have a new nature. We have a spiritual nature. Yes. We have been born again. We have received God's Spirit. However, that old nature still lives in us. And I think, I know we're going to talk about this on Sunday, so we can't unpack the message, but just so you know, come Sunday, you'll hear more about this idea.
Yeah.
But what it means is we still have our sin nature, but we've been given a new nature. And in that new nature, if we live in that new nature, if we walk by the Spirit, we won't even operate in the old nature. However, there is still potential that we operate at times in the sin nature that we have, which leads us to sin, to disobey God. And so it doesn't negate...
So our feet get dirty.
Exactly. It doesn't negate that we have been bathed. We have been washed. We have been cleansed. Like, when God sees us, he doesn't see our sin. He doesn't see our sin nature. He sees Jesus. However, there are instances where we can still go back and operate in our flesh, is what the Bible says in Romans.
That's right.
And Galatians, but we operate in our flesh, our old sin nature, our old man, and it leads us to disobey God, and it leads us to what we call sin, right? There's actions in our life that we would call sin. And so in those moments, we don't have to go and get saved again. We don't have to go back to Jesus and crucify him again and say, oh, I need you to die on the cross again for my sins. No, that has been finalized in heaven. The moment your faith is deposited, you have been clothed, gifted with Jesus' righteousness. However, what we call the biblical term for this, the theological term for this, is repentance, right? It is that there are moments where we repent for those actions that are disobedient to God. That, yes, I've been saved, I have faith in Jesus, but in this moment, in traffic at 5 o'clock, I got to get somewhere. I operated in the old man, the old flesh, and
look,
I gave that guy the middle finger.
I just,
you know what I mean? But and that's rooted in our sin nature that causes us to to lose patience, to lash out in anger, to have envy and jealousy and all those things. You can read about that again in Galatians 5. But in those moments, it doesn't mean that God doesn't love you anymore, that your sin's not atoned for, that your sin's not forgiven. It just simply means in this moment, like, I need my feet washed, to go back to the illustration.
So the way I talked about this Sunday is what this looks like and sounds like can be, very similar sometimes. What it feels like is entirely different. Yeah. And here's what I mean. There are people who every night before they go to bed, or at least multiple times at nights before they go to bed, God, I need you to forgive me. I'm so sorry. Please forgive me. Please save me. I'm so sorry for what I did. I won't do it again. And they pray that hoping maybe he'll forgive me one more time. Man, I hope that he won't say no this time. I hope I haven't gone too far. I hope I haven't done this one too many times. Man, I hope, God, would you please just forgive me? I hope you'll forgive me. That is a lack of understanding of what it means to be bathed all over. Now, someone else may pray something that sounds and looks almost just like that night. God, I'm sorry. Forgive me. I'm sorry for what I did. I'm not going to do it again. But they're not doing it in a hope that maybe they'll be forgiven. They do it because they know they already are.
Yeah.
That forgiveness is assured and secured because of Jesus. And so they're repenting, not hoping to be forgiven, but because they already are. And I think that the difference between the internal motivations of those two things go a long way to show your understanding of what salvation is, and maybe even where you're at in your relationship with Jesus. Right. Because if you are still praying every night, once a week, God, please save me. I hope you'll save me. I hope I haven't gone too far. Then that shows that you've never understood who Jesus is and what he's done for you. Now, you still need to pray often when you are aware and convicted of sin, God, forgive me. I'm sorry. But not because you hope you're forgiven, because you're confident you are.
Right. Yeah. And again, it's that understanding of the gospel. It looks the same, but the motivations are different. Right. One is operating from a place of salvation. The one is almost like cross your fingers and hope for salvation.
That's right.
Right. And it's just, and again, here, if you are a follower of Jesus, like you have been saved by your faith in him, like we have to understand, like there's a natural emotional response of like guilt and remorse when we know that we've sinned. Just like if we hurt someone that we love, you have a relationship with your spouse or your kids, like you love those people, and yet there are times, like kids are maybe the best example, like there are times where you lose your temper or you act out or whatever.
Yeah.
It doesn't negate your love for them. It's because you love them that you have that response afterwards. It's like, man, I love you. I love you, daughter, son, who just acted like a fool in public, right?
No doubt.
But it's because I love you, because I have a relationship with you, that it leads me to a place where, okay, when the emotion wears off and that night before we go to bed, it's, you know what, I'm sorry, I shouldn't have done that. Mm-hmm. I shouldn't have lashed out. I shouldn't have said that. I was upset. Will you forgive me or whatever? Like that's a different motivation. It's a motivation that says it's because of the relationship that we have. It's because I love you that it leads me to this place of I want to make it right. And I think that's a whole different than, oh, well, God, I've been really bad and I hope you still love me and that you'll save me.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. And I think that, one of the things that we have to wrap our mind around is that when we are convicted over sin in our life and when we feel the need to repent of it, that is not an angry God who's giving us a sign of his judgment. That is a loving God who's extending to us grace because he knows he's standing willing and ready to forgive. And so like you said, it is love that convicts you when you lose it sometimes. It is the love of God that convicts us when we, find ourselves wandering with the dirty feet.
Yeah. It's his love that leads us back, right? Yeah. It's the picture of the shepherd. The sheep have...
It's the kindness of the Lord that leads us to repentance.
The sheep have wandered and gone astray, and he, in his love, brings us back, And sometimes those moments are painful because...
That's the call back to Jonah, right? I mean, almost missed that, but, that's our Jonah series. The whale was grace, not judgment.
Exactly. And, the guilt, the emotion, the response, the feel like you let it down, like that's all part of the hurt, but it's based on the relationship. And so it's really, again, God's grace leading us back to himself.
Yeah. Well, I think the series has been really good. I hope you guys have gotten a lot from it. We always say we hope you enjoyed it. And I do, because the opposite of is, man, I was bored out of my mind. That was terrible. But more than hoping you enjoy it, I hope that you learned something from it. I hope that you saw Jesus more clearly. I hope that on the other side of this series, you look more like him, you live more like him, you love more like him, and that when you go to him for answers, you'll know that whatever answer you get is the answer that you need. And I think that's important. We're going to be moving into a standalone series or standalone message this Sunday. It's going to kind of pair up with O-Day, and then I'm excited about the next series that we're jumping on, where we are going to be looking at the doctrine of Scripture. Now, I know that sounds a little boring to hear me say that, but we have some cool things up our sleeve that I think is going to be very enlightening and interesting for you. So I'm excited to dive into that. Any last words, Matthew?
No, I'm excited for Sunday. I hope to see you guys at O-Day. I think it's going to be a blast.
It really will. And, let's be honest, at this point in life, what do we have to look forward to on weekends other than church and O-Day?
That's right. And what better place to do it than the beautiful, historical Swanee River?
Hey, if you bring your neighbor's kids, ask for permission. See you next week.
Thanks for joining us for this episode of Let's Talk About That. We hope it encouraged and challenged you as we continue to grow in this journey of faith and embrace community. If you have more questions, thoughts, or feedback, we'd love to hear from you. Reach out to us through our social media channels or visit our website and stay connected. Your questions are what make this podcast a dynamic and enriching experience. If you found today's discussion meaningful, don't forget to subscribe, share, and leave a review. Your engagement helps us spread the message and connect with others who may find value in these conversations. Until next time, we hope this episode inspired you and will help you bring Sunday's message into your week ahead. Keep the conversation alive, and remember, we're all on this journey together.